a few years back. I was at a conference, small gathering finance professionals, the kind of room where people are comfortable talking numbers. During a break, a woman came up to me, late 30s, senior analyst at a solid firm. She'd just gotten a 7% raise, the kind of number that sounds like genuine recognition. I asked her how it felt. She laughed, but it wasn't a happy laugh. She said, "Honestly, Jonathan, I went home that night and felt nothing. Checked my account a month later and I genuinely could not tell anything had changed." Same anxiety at the grocery store, same quiet math at the end of every month, same low-grade frustration of doing everything correctly and still feeling like the ground is slowly shifting beneath you. She wasn't reckless, she wasn't impulsive, she wasn't living beyond her means in any obvious way. She was simply living, and somewhere along the line, simply living had become quietly unaffordable. I've heard that story in different forms for 30 years, different cities, different salaries, different life stages. The details change, the ending doesn't. I can't figure out where it goes. So today, I want to talk about why that keeps happening, not with platitudes, not with a budget template, but with the same honest look at the structural reality that I'd give someone sitting across from me privately. Stay with me, because this conversation goes somewhere most financial content refuses to go. My name is Jonathan. I spent the better part of my life watching how ordinary people's money actually moves through their lives, why certain patterns repeat regardless of income, why some people quietly build something real while others with similar earnings stay stuck indefinitely. That's what this channel is about. No hype, no shortcuts, just honest observation. If that's the kind of conversation you're looking for, subscribe. Let's get into it. Part 1. The problem is being named wrong. Most financial advice, when it hears, "I can't make my paycheck stretch," responds the same way. Let's find where you're overspending. And I understand the instinct, it's the obvious starting point. But I've watched that approach fail people consistently, not because they lacked discipline, but because it addressed the wrong problem. They cut subscriptions, cooked at home, stopped the small indulgences, and 4 months later, they were in the identical position, just slightly more resentful of their own life. The problem isn't always behavior. Sometimes it's structural. And here's the critical distinction. Structural problems don't respond to behavioral solutions. Let me show you what I mean with actual numbers. Part 2. What your paycheck actually is. Take a $65,000 salary. On paper, that's a reasonable income, solidly above the national median. After federal taxes, state taxes, Social Security, and Medicare, you're taking home somewhere between $46,000 and $49,000 annually, depending on where you live. Call it $47,500. That's roughly $3,950 a month. Now let's be honest about where that goes. A one-bedroom apartment in a mid-sized American city is running $1,500 to $1,900 a month right now. Take the lower end, $4,500. That's 38% of your take-home. Gone before you've purchased a single thing. Transportation, car payment, insurance, fuel. For most Americans, this isn't optional. Another $650 to $750 a month. You're already at $2,250. Before groceries, utilities, phone or internet, groceries for one person, done reasonably. $375 to $475. Utilities, $150 to $200. Phone and internet, $1,040 to $185. Has to absorb every medical expense, car repair, dental visit, clothing purchase, and anything that makes life feel like something beyond pure subsistence. We're now at approximately $3,100 to $3,200 a month spent. You started with $3,950. What's left, $700 to $850, has to absorb every medical expense, car repair, dental visit, clothing purchase, and anything that makes life feel like something beyond pure subsistence. And that's before student loans, which average $300 to $400 a month for borrowers in their 30s. Run that subtraction. The cushion doesn't just shrink, it nearly vanishes. Here's what I want you to understand. This isn't a $65,000 problem. People earning $85,000, $95,000 describe an almost identical experience. The costs calibrate upward to meet the income in ways that feel almost mechanical. This is not personal failure. This is a structural reality that most financial content politely avoids naming. Part 3, the raise that isn't a raise. There's something happening to working people that I believe causes genuine psychological harm, and it's almost never discussed honestly. You receive a raise, 4%, maybe 5%. Your employer presents it as meaningful progress, and for a brief moment, it feels like it might be. But let's look at the math underneath that feeling. If you were earning $65,000 in 2020 and received a 4% annual raise every year since, you'd be at roughly $75,000 today. Nominally progress, except the cost of essential living in that same period didn't rise 4% annually. Depending on your market and your spending profile, housing, groceries, energy, and insurance rose somewhere between 28% and 42% in aggregate over those 5 years. The number on your pay stub went up. The number that actually matters, what that money purchases, moved in the opposite direction. Just slowly enough that most people don't register it as loss until the frustration has built past the point of quiet tolerance. I had a mentor early in my career who told me something I've returned to many times since. Don't confuse a larger number with a stronger position. A salary growing at 4% inside a cost environment growing at 7% isn't compensation. It's a slow, polite reduction wearing the costume of progress. Part 4. The costs that don't announce themselves. Beyond the structural math, there's a category of financial drain that I think is one of the most underestimated forces in modern household economics. I call it the invisible subscription layer. Think about what simply didn't exist as a recurring cost 10 or 12 years ago. Streaming services. One felt reasonable. Now the average household carries 3 or 4, totaling $55 to $90 monthly for content alone. Software that once had a one-time purchase price is now a monthly subscription. Delivery fees, service fees, convenience surcharges that appear at the final checkout screen after you've already committed to the purchase. Each charge is small enough to feel inconsequential. Collectively, they function as a quiet, automatic withdrawal from your financial life that never required a conscious decision to begin. The exercise I've recommended for years: pull up your last 2 bank statements and mark every single recurring charge. Not just the ones you remember. Most people find 2 to 4 charges they'd genuinely forgotten existed. That's $30, $50, sometimes $80 a month leaving on autopilot for months, sometimes years, without delivering a single moment of noticed value. This isn't about living without conveniences. It's about the difference between spending you choose deliberately and spending that simply continues because you never stopped it. Passive spending is one of the quietest wealth erosion forces I've observed over an entire career. Part 5. What hosting actually did to the equation. If I had to identify one structural shift that explains the majority of financial stress working adults carry today, it's this. Housing costs have decoupled from wages in a way that has no real precedent in the modern era. Through much of the latter 20th century, the general rule held that a home cost roughly 2 to 3 times a household's annual income. That ratio was stable enough that financial planning could be built around it. Today, in most American metros, and increasingly in mid-sized cities that were considered affordable a decade ago, median home prices are 5, 6, sometimes 7 times median household income. Rental prices followed, a unit renting for $1,105 years ago commonly asks $1,600 or more now. Not because the apartment improved, because the market moved. When housing reliably consumes 35 to 45% of take-home income, there is no budgeting discipline in existence that restores meaningful financial breathing room from what remains. You can optimize every other category perfectly and still find yourself operating with nothing left to build on. I've sat with people earning $90,000 in cities like Denver or Nashville who describe the same daily financial experience as someone earning $50,000 in a lower-cost market 10 years ago. The income changed. The feeling didn't. I know what people want me to say next. They want a workaround, a technique that makes the numbers cooperate. I won't offer one that doesn't exist. What I will offer are the decisions that actually change your position over time, which I'll get to shortly. Part 6. The slow drift upward that feels like progress. In the interest of fairness, because this isn't entirely structural, there's a behavioral pattern worth examining. Honestly, not to assign blame, but because understanding it gives you leverage over it. When income increases, the natural and understandable response is a modest upgrade, a slightly better apartment, a newer car, dining out with a bit more frequency. Each individual upgrade feels earned and justified because you worked for it. But here's what the math quietly does. Fixed costs rise to meet the new income. The upgraded baseline becomes your new normal. And unlike an impulse purchase, a lifestyle upgrade almost never reverses. Nobody willingly moves back to the smaller apartment once they've adjusted. So the next raise doesn't reach savings or investments. It maintains, sometimes slightly elevates, the current baseline, and the treadmill continues at a slightly higher speed, while the feeling of financial pressure remains essentially unchanged. The people I've observed build genuine, lasting financial stability. Not the flashy kind, the the durable kind, almost universally share one quiet practice. They were deliberately slow to let lifestyle expand. They allowed income to grow while holding expenses relatively flat for as long as they could tolerate. The gap between those two numbers is the only figure that actually compounds into something. Part 7. The decisions that actually change your position. Alright, I've spent the majority of this conversation naming the problem with precision. Now let's talk about what actually moves the needle. First, treat your fixed costs as the most consequential line in your financial life, not discretionary spending, fixed costs. Because fixed costs are what you pay regardless of how the month goes. They define your floor. Before you commit to any new fixed expense, ask yourself honestly, if my income fell 20%, could I carry this without strain? If the answer is uncertain, the commitment is too large. Second, intercept every raise before it blends into your spending. The moment additional income becomes part of your regular flow, it disappears into the existing lifestyle. It becomes groceries. It becomes a slightly upgraded streaming tier. 3 months later, it's invisible. The practice that actually works. Treat every income increase as money that doesn't exist for spending purposes. The day a raise takes effect, create an automatic transfer for the difference and direct it to savings or investments before it touches your checking account, before your habits recalibrate around it. You've already demonstrated you can live on your previous income. Keep doing that and let the difference work quietly in the background. Third, audit every recurring charge on a fixed schedule, not when you feel like it. Twice a year, minimum. Set a calendar reminder and honor it. Go through every charge and make a deliberate decision, not a passive one, a decision. Cancel what you wouldn't notice losing. Keep what genuinely adds value. This is about intentionality, not deprivation. Fourth, build income, not just restraint. This is the lever most conventional financial advice perpetually underemphasizes. There is an absolute ceiling on how much expense cutting can accomplish. You cannot subtract your way to financial security. At some point, the variable that actually transforms your position is income, specifically income that isn't entirely dependent on one employer's stability and your ability to work 40+ hours indefinitely. That doesn't require dramatic action. It starts with a single question. What knowledge or capability do I carry that could generate value for someone outside my current role? One additional income stream, even a modest one, changes the psychology of every other financial decision you make. It reduces the fear that keeps people overly conservative, and that fear is expensive in its own quiet way. Fifth, stop optimizing spending and start understanding assets. The real gap between people who build lasting financial stability and those who remain perpetually squeezed almost never comes down to how disciplined their budget was. It comes down to whether they own things that grow and generate income or whether they only own their time. A savings account preserves value, an investment grows it. That distinction applied consistently over time is what separates the two groups. You don't need to start large, you need to start a consistent automatic allocation of some portion of every paycheck toward growth assets, index funds, investment accounts, equity is the single habit I've observed separate the builders from the earners. I want to come back to where we started. If you're financially stressed on an income that should theoretically be sufficient, you are not failing. You're not uniquely undisciplined. You're not alone in nodding through everything said today. The environment most working adults are navigating right now shifted without announcement, without explanation, and without any corresponding adjustment in wage norms or financial expectations. Housing moved, food moved, healthcare moved, childcare moved, and none of those categories waited for income to catch up before they did. The most honest thing I can offer is this: clarity about where the real problem sits is more valuable than any tactical shortcut, and a few deliberate decisions made consistently, without drama, will do more over 5 years than a decade of anxious, unfocused discipline. That's what's actually available to you, not someday. Now, if this conversation was useful, subscribe. This is the kind of content I put out regularly, not designed to impress, designed to be genuinely useful to people who are serious about understanding how money actually works. I'll see you in the next one.